I'm happy to be gracious and allow Mr. Murphy to go first.
Mr. Murphy, firearms and gun control have been central issues in the race. Your opponent says you would leave domestic abusers with weapons. Would you?
I would leave domestic abusers with weapons. Let's get this straight. The SAFE Act, I would do a repeal on the SAFE Act immediately. What my opponent doesn't realize is that my wife has served on the board of directors for Hope Store for a number of years. It's one of the largest domestically abused agencies in Westchester County. She is the one who walks the walk and talks the talk. It is something that is dear to our heart, this whole women's equality issue. I propose to my opponent that we sign 9 out of the 10 points right now, and let's get it on and talk about the real issue about the 10th point. Domestically abused ladies, their rights were taken away from them when the SAFE Act came into an act. So in other words, if a lady was domestically abused and she wanted to exercise her Second Amendment right, and she bought a weapon, she became a criminal overnight. Anybody, when you're passing legislation at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's almost as good as passing Obamacare.
For Mr. Wagner, are you comfortable with your mailings on the SAFE Act? What's your specific view on gun control, and should New York State have made any efforts to keep Remington and its jobs in the state?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you to the paper for hosting this forum. I am passionate on the issue of gun violence. I think we need common sense, not nonsense. What does that mean? I believe strongly in background checks. The federal government has failed. We could probably agree on that. The state government acted and strengthened background checks with the SAFE Act. I support that. The state government acted and strengthened the ban on assault weapons. I support that. Also in the SAFE Act, the state government acted and increased penalties for those criminals who committed crimes against first responders. I support that. I serve on the board of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, the state's longest-serving gun advocacy organization. Not only do we advocate for changes to gun laws that make sense, but we also work in schools with a nonprofit teaching students in at-risk high schools that turning to a gun is never an answer. There are a lot of issues with gun violence. Some have to do with mental health. Some have to do with families. Some have to do with society. But I do not accept that our laws are strong enough to reduce gun violence. And so I am a strong advocate for strengthening our gun laws, but at the same time respecting the Second Amendment. I grew up in Dutchess County. My family are hunters. I happen not to be. But I think we should respect the Second Amendment, but that does not mean we should not be looking to strengthen the gun laws and make sure that criminals and the mentally ill do not get access to firearms.
A follow-up for
Are you for or against the SAFE Act?
I am for the SAFE Act. I want to, though, because I think, listen, I know part of debates are to pit one side against another. And me and Mr. Murphy have plenty of disagreements. We'll talk about that. I am for the SAFE Act. I'm for the things I just talked about. Mr. Murphy would say repeal it. But one thing I agree with Mr. Murphy on is that no laws should be passed in the middle of the night. That is wrong. And I think Senator Gibson, who's in the back, not to steal his thunder, has a great bill called the Vampire Voting Bill. No bill should be passed when the entire state is sleeping. Those bills should age. Voters should have a chance to read the bills and call like heck to their legislators. If the legislators don't vote the way they like, they can throw them out of office. But I strongly support the notion that voters should know what was voted on. And so my critique of the SAFE Act is not the substance, but the fact that it was rushed through and folks didn't have a chance to know what was in the bill.
Senator Dave, would you like to have a response?
Response to the SAFE Act? Anybody who's made a criminal overnight, my brother-in-law is at NYPD, sheriffs are law-abiding citizens, SRO officers that go onto school grounds became criminals overnight. You do not pass that type of legislation without having all your facts and details, and especially passing it at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like I said, you pass anything at 2 o'clock in the morning, I compare it to Obamacare, and that's where, look what Obamacare has gotten us so far.
Thank you.
As a follow-up, can you simply state your position on Roe v. Wade? Should it be repealed? Start with you.
Myself?
Yes.
Roe versus Wade. If Roe versus Wade was repealed in Congress, That would still not change anything right here in New York State, because we are not a pro-life. We do not have pro-life laws. The 10th point in the Women's Equality Bill, if you think for 1 second that I would allow a non-medical professional perform an abortion as a healthcare professional and put a woman's life and a woman at risk for any specific reason, and have a non-medical professional perform an abortion at up until the point of delivery, you are sadly mistaken. I will never vote for that. If you don't like the sex of your baby, you can abort it. If you have twins, you can abort it. You will never get my vote for an abortion performed by a non-medical professional. As a healthcare professional, you are not only putting the baby obviously at risk, you are putting a woman's health at risk, which is a woman's issue.
Same question to you, sir.
Well, I strongly support the protection of Roe v. Wade, but something Mr. Murphy just said is incredibly troubling. He said, if Congress repeals Roe v. Wade. Well, let me tell you something, sir. Congress doesn't pass our constitutional rights. Our Supreme Court does. Our Supreme Court has found that a woman's privacy and right to control her own health care with her doctor is a right in our Constitution. It is not for politicians, especially male politicians, to put themselves between a woman and a doctor. I am strongly pro-choice. And Mr. Murphy wants to make this all complicated and start talking about crazy things like that that aren't true, that aren't in the Women's Equality Act. The simple truth is, I am the only pro-choice candidate in this race. During Mr. Murphy's Republican primary, he beat up Bob Castelli, good man because he was pro-choice. Said, I'm a pro-life type of guy. Said he would do everything in his power to stop the Women's Equality Act. Well, it's not the Republican primary anymore, and this district and this state is proudly pro-choice, and it's a big difference between the two of us.
Can I follow up with that very briefly?
After we ask the next question, if you folks wish to take time out of that question to follow up, please feel free to do so. But let's keep moving here.
Jobs are clearly a predominant issue. From 2000 to 2010, an incredible 3.4 million people left New York State. That's a huge outmigration of people from New York, the largest such exodus of any state, according to the IRS. What specific ways, Mr. Murphy, will you advocate to bring more jobs to New York and retain those already here?
Well, the difference between myself and my opponent is experience. I've been a local councilman in the town of Yorktown for the past 5 years. We're going on our 3rd consecutive tax decrease in the town of Yorktown. In the past 4.5 years, I have ushered in close to $250 million worth of economic development for the town of Yorktown. We have a 30,000 square foot building off Lee Boulevard, Mount Kisco Medical Group. Costco's coming in. We build a public-private partnership in the town of Yorktown. The difference between myself and my opponent is business. I'm a businessman. I know how to run a business. I understand taxes. I don't collect a $350,000 salary every year from a law firm that goes out and represents what I believe are some criminals, like the ones that were in Guantanamo Bay that his law firm represented.
Same question.
One day Mr. Murphy's attacking my law firm for being a corporate law firm, and the next day we represent criminals at Guantanamo Bay. This is what happens when you're losing a race and you're throwing mud at the wall. I'm going to answer the question. The question was about jobs. Jobs are critical to this region. And what do? We have to rebuild our infrastructure. Everyone knows the group that is hurting the hardest in our region is the trades, folks that build things with their hands. We have a great project at the southern piece of this district, the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's putting a lot of people back to work, and we're moving forward on that project. But that bridge is one project. Here in Putnam County, close to 50% of your bridges are deemed structurally deficient by the state. Structurally deficient. We need to fix those bridges. And we can marry the need to put people back to work and rebuild our infrastructure right here in Putnam. And I'm not just talking about roads and bridges, I'm talking about IT infrastructure, so small businesses and other businesses can be created right here in Putnam County. We also need to focus on our small business community. One of my real critiques of Albany, and listen, I'm not a career politician, I am someone who has a job, Mr. Murphy is right, is that Albany has paid too much attention to the big businesses. tax cuts for IBM, tax cuts for corporate welfare. I want to take that money, if those companies aren't creating jobs, and put it into small businesses who create our real jobs on Main Street. That's my jobs agenda.
Mr. Murphy,
Well, let's keep moving.
almost all agreed the implementation of the Common Core in our schools was a complete hash. Should it be repealed? Why did this become such a debacle, even after failure was clear? Yes, Mr. Murphy.
Well, unfortunately, I had a great forum on Monday night. There was an unbelievable one of the leading authorities on the Common Core, Dr. Peg Lusky, that came to speak right up here in Putnam. I have 3 little kids. The implementation of Common Core has been an absolute complete disaster. Common Core actually lowers our standards. Jason Zimba, who wrote the mathematical standards for Common Core, believes that if we lower the standards that everybody's entitled to or has the opportunity to go a non-selective college. I'd like to give my kids the opportunity to shoot for the stars. Let them shoot for Harvard, let them shoot for Yale, let them shoot for Albany. At the end of the day, the implementation of it has been a complete disaster. I feel so passionate about that I actually went out and got over 5,000 signatures to stop the Common Core. You can look for me on the ballot this November, next Tuesday, the 4th. A little bit on the road again, but November 4th, I will be on the ballot to stop Common Core. It is something that I feel very passionate about, and the reality is I live, breathe, and eat it every night with my 3 little kids. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore, according to Common Core.
I largely agree with Mr. Murphy. I mean, the implementation of Common Core was a disaster. My mother was a school teacher in Poland. She taught special ed in the elementary school and just retired a couple years ago. And one of the reasons she retired early was not just to sleep in, was because the state kept coming down and taking over classrooms. We have to trust our teachers. We have to trust our local schools. And Common Core does the opposite. Common Core asks for a one-size-fits-all approach to education, and I think it's wrong. We went a couple minutes, and we haven't even mentioned the current senator. Senator Ball has an actually excellent bill to put a moratorium on Common Core. I would support that bill to stop the implementation and actually get real educators and people who know about education in a room to revamp our education standards. You know, education is one of, maybe this is because my mother's a teacher, but education is one of the few areas where politicians feel like they can second-guess actual professionals. I won't do that. I will be committed to making sure that we have an education system that teaches our students for the 21st century, doesn't just teach to a test, and we end this corporatization of education. I am very concerned about all this big money coming in from people like Bill Gates and these charter school folks in New York City who think our public schools in the Hudson Valley should be run by spreadsheet. I disagree. The minds of the 21st century that we need to create here in the Hudson Valley have to have critical thinking skills, and we do that by empowering local school districts. Common Core does not do that. That's why it's not fit for this region or our schools.
At the beginning of your debate here, you refused to shake your opponent's hand. Can you actually be nonpartisan if you refuse to shake hands with your opponent?
Now, there was a reason for that. You know what? I was born and raised, when you haven't anything nice to say, don't say it at all. Obviously, people in the media and everybody in your mailbox, you've seen some pretty derogatory pieces that have come out from my opponent. If he thinks it's okay to send out a picture of a lady with a black eye and think I'm okay with that, I have issues with that. I refuse to go into his cesspool, okay? I'm about integrity, and I respect people. And I deserve respect like I respect him. But he hasn't respected me, so I won't respect him.
Thank you very much.
I imagine I can respond.
60 seconds.
I didn't know my campaign was the only one that sent a negative mailer. Has anyone got a negative mailer for Mr. Murphy? First things first, the mailer he just referred to, we didn't send. An outside group that we have no involvement or coordination with sent it. And I'll tell you right now, I denounced that mailer. I think it was wrong. I agree with you. We didn't send that mailer, so you're setting up what is, I think, called a straw man. Listen, politics is tough. And I have a 3-year-old at home. She's potty training actually just last week, so I know how to put up with crap. But the real crap in this state is what the taxpayers are putting up with in Albany. And as hard as this campaign is, and it is hard, and a lot of mud has been thrown, and to be fair, it's not always me and Mr. Murphy. It's outside groups, it's our state party. It is a lot harder to be a middle-class family in New York. That's what I'm focused on in the last 2 weeks, on their agenda, on their troubles. I can handle some negative ads on the TV and in the mailboxes. I know it's hard to be middle class here in the Hudson Valley, and that's who I'm fighting for.
I wouldn't mind if it was the truth, but it's the odds that I don't put up for.
Let's continue to our next question.
Mr. Murphy, the governor justified in shutting down the Moreland panel in Albany? Is Albany still steeped in corruption, in your opinion?
Well, it's a great question. I can tell you what I've done on the town level, which I'm very, very proud of. We have rewritten our ethics law in the town of Yorktown to give it more teeth. So us politicians should have our feet held to the fire. We are held at higher standards, and we should be leaders in the community. And if we do something wrong, we should have ourselves, checked. The problem is that with the Moreland Commission, when the crumbs led right up to the governor's door, he pulled the rug out from underneath it. He decided to get a panel together called the Moreland Commission, which I believe is the Ethics Commission, and he realized that some of the stuff was coming back right up to his front door. Listen, as political people, whether Justin, myself, and other politicians in here, we are held at higher standards. We should be underneath the microscope. And the reality is, if we do something wrong, there should be circumstances. Enough of the days of double standards. What's good for you is not good for the people. We are elected to represent you, the people, and that's what I want to do, and I hold my ethics standards very high.
Mr. Wagner, I'll ask you the same question. Was the governor justified in shutting down the Moreland panel? Is Albany's culture still steeped in corruption?
It is. In fact, as an outsider, it often seems the only thing bipartisan in Albany is corruption. There's a new indictment almost every week. And one of my criticisms is that those indictments come from the U.S. Attorney, which is completely appropriate. The U.S. Attorney is doing his job. But there should also be an independent agency within the legislature to investigate the legislature and let the cards drop where they may. And I support an independent agency to investigate the legislature, a real one. On the Moreland Commission, I will tell you that I was not in the room. I do not know all the decisions that were made, but to me, it certainly seems like the Moreland Commission should have been allowed to finish their work. And why were they not allowed to finish their work? Because the status quo in Albany, Shelley Silver in the Assembly, Dean Skelos in the Senate, wanted them stopped because they were investigating their members and other members of the status quo. I won't pretend to be the governor, I won't pretend to know all the information, but to me, yes, they should have been allowed to finish their work. But the issue of ethics is a broader issue. We need real reform in Albany. I talked about that independent investigative agency. We also need to clamp down on politicians who violate the public trust, who are convicted of a crime for defrauding the taxpayers and then still collect a pension while they're sitting in jail. That is wrong.
Let's now turn to our closing statements. 2 minutes for each candidate. According to the coin toss, Mr. Murphy will go first.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank you very much for having me here tonight, and my apologies, Justin. Secondly, the moderator panel, thank you so much for your time, and the residents of Putnam County, anywhere else you've come, thank you for coming out here tonight on a rainy day to listen to these important issues. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Terrence Murphy. I am married to my wife, Caroline. She's a nurse over at Northern Westchester Hospital. I have a lovely 11-year-old girl, Michaela. I have a 10-year-old son, Jack, and I have a 4-year-old, Kian. The reality is I've been a councilman in the town of Yorktown for the past 5 years. In 5 years, we've ushered in close to $250 million worth of economic development. We are going on our 3rd consecutive tax decrease. And like I said earlier, we rewrote our ethics committee to give it more teeth. These are things that you, the people, should have the public trust in us. When you elect us, we are here representing you. But tonight, I think the difference between myself and my opponent, and I'm going to go there, is integrity. Is integrity and respect. And tonight, I think we finally put it on the table. I've never been, politics is a dirty game, but when you go after people's kids and my wife and my family businesses, come after me, come out and say, Terrence, you voted wrong on something like this. I get it. We can go man to man and back to back. These are important issues, but the reality is when I go to Albany, God willing, with your vote on November 4th, I want to be someone who you can look up to, and you know you have integrity, and you have someone who's going to have your back. And I will have your back, and I'll tell you the truth. There will be no lies with Terrence Murphy.
Well, nothing screams integrity like refusing to shake someone's hand. Listen, I'm running for the state senate because I simply believe we need reform in Albany. That's what I'm running on. We need to do something different. And I would suggest the difference between myself and my opponent is that I represent reform and he represents more of the status quo. I want to thank the VFW for hosting tonight. You know, on Monday I had the privilege and the honor to go to the Montrose VA. I grew up idolizing my grandfather in Dutchess County, who spent years in the Castle Point VA. Visiting with our heroes and our veterans is something that should be completely bipartisan. And again, to invoke Senator Ball's work, I will pledge to continue his work on veterans issues, which I think has been both bipartisan and very well received by folks, not just in Putnam County, but in Dutchess and in Westchester. There are a lot of policy discussions that we can have about why I should be the next state senator. But I want to let you know personally that for me, my 3-year-old daughter at home, I want her to grow up in a state where our environment is protected. I want her to grow up in a state where we create jobs, not just minimum wage jobs, not just jobs that pay the bills, but jobs that middle-class families can live on, retire on, raise a family on. I want her to grow up in a state where we protect women's rights, not just 9/10 of their rights, but all of their rights. I want my daughter to grow up in a state where she is not crushed by property taxes like middle-class families throughout this region. That is why I am running for the state senate, for the future of my daughters, for your daughters, your sons, your grandkids, because I know the Hudson Valley is a wonderful place to raise a family, but it's not because of Albany. We need help from Albany, we need real relief, and I will be the partner to help deliver for the Hudson Valley. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thanks for having us.
One more housekeeping matter. We do have a few seats up front if there are people who would like to take a seat. We might